One of the sort of unexpected outcomes of this murder, a huge outpouring of praise and adoration on social media for the suspected killer. The killing has unleashed a flood of stories filled with frustration and anger about insurance companies and denied medical complaints. Joining me now is former health insurance company executive Wendell Potter. First of all, when you look at what's happened online, were you in any way surprised at the amount of frankly, hero worship towards the man accused in this killing?
I was, because nothing like this has ever happened. So I think it took us all by surprise. I will say, though, I'm not shocked when you stop to think about the rage that people have about health insurance companies in this country. I experienced that even when I was in the industry. We being other executives, that healthcare people in healthcare in this country do not like health insurance. They know that these companies are in the business to make money, and they've erected barriers that make it increasingly difficult for us to get the care that we need. So people are just speaking out, I think, out of frustration, and it's unfortunate because we've lost a life, and presumably someone, at least what I've heard, who might have been a lone voice within United Healthcare, trying to get the company to be more friendly toward its customers.
You mentioned this, but you walked away from a six-figure salary as the former vice president of Cigna back in the early 2000s. What was it, in a nutshell, that made you say, I can't do this anymore?
There were two or three things. One, I refer to those barriers. One in particular is refusing to pay for medically necessary care. There was a case involving a 17-year-old girl in Los Angeles who needed a liver transplant, and a medical director for Cigna 2,500 miles away said he didn't think it was medically necessary. The surgery had been scheduled. A liver had been found that was a perfect match for Nataline Sarkeesian, but Cigna said no, it wouldn't cover it. And eventually, Cigna caved to public pressure because it became a very highly publicized case, and it became a big PR problem for Cigna, and Cigna eventually agreed to pay for the transplant, but it came too late. Delays can be lethal, and these companies delay needed care all the time, and that was the case for Nataline Sarkeesian. She died just a few days before Christmas in 2007, and I walked away. There were other reasons. People are being saddled with high out-of-pocket costs. Prior to that, I went to a medical clinic in East Tennessee, near where I grew up in East Tennessee, and people were standing in long lines at a county fair at a free medical clinic waiting to get care that was being provided in barns and animal stalls. Many of those people had health insurance, but they were in plans with high deductibles, and they just didn't have the money in the bank to cover the care that they needed before their insurance would kick in. We pay higher and higher premiums every single year, but one way or another, insurance companies are devaluing our policies, and that's what this rage is all about.
I do want to ask you about something that you said to the Senate Healthcare Reform Panel about 20 years ago. You said insurance companies routinely dump policyholders who are less profitable or who get sick as part of their never-ending quest to meeting Wall Street relentless profit expectations. Do you see any changes for the better from back then, about 20 years ago, 2009?
Sadly, no. In fact, these companies are making even more aggressive use of prior authorization. They're increasing the out-of-pocket obligations year after year. And they just simply are not paying attention to the needs of patients. They are dropping customers as well, too. We're seeing that this year. Most of these big insurance companies have largely taken over our Medicare program. United Health, in particular, enrolls about a third of people who are in so-called Medicare Advantage plans. And I say so-called because they're able to advertise in ways that deceive people, that get them to enroll in these plans. But increasingly, insurance companies this year have been dropping their Medicare Advantage enrollees because they thought they were needing more care than they wanted to pay for. So Humana and CVS, which owns Aetna, have been pulling out of a lot of markets around the country, leaving their Medicare Advantage enrollees in the lurch. They have to figure out what they're going to do next. So that happens all the time.
Wendell Parter, thank you so much for sharing your expertise and giving us real insight into an issue that affects all Americans. I really appreciate it.
Mangione's arrest has spawned Spotify playlists, fan art, and tattoos that glorify the alleged murderer and his crime. TikTok's nickname for him, quote, the adjuster, an apparent nod to the healthcare insurance adjusters who process claims. Mangione's lawyer saying yesterday that his office has even received emails with offers to cover the suspect's legal bills.
Obviously, my client appreciates the support that he has, but I don't know. I'd have to look in, but it just doesn't sit right with me, really. The Supreme Court says, all these rich billionaires can give all kind of money to candidates, and that's free speech. So maybe these people are exercising their right to free speech and saying that's the way they're supporting my client.
Jonah Goldberg, just a remarkable cultural moment here. A difficult one, obviously. I did think it was interesting that when Jason went and talked to normal people, even some of whom, who were willing to say, like, our healthcare industry's got a lot of problems, they were not saying the things that people are willing to say online.
Yeah, so that's what struck me in the piece too, and it proves yet again. We say this, we talk about this a lot in politics. The very online world is very different than the real world, and that said, I find all of this appalling. I agree it's a big cultural moment, and it says something interesting. I wrote a book where a big part of my argument was that one of the reasons our politics are so screwed up is we're following politics like it's a form of entertainment. When you follow entertainment, you just root for the hero. You want them to win. You don't really care whether they break the rules and all that kind of stuff. And I think that's bleeding out into these other things. We've seen some of this before. D.B. Cooper, some of you might remember, was the guy who hijacked a plane and got all this money and parachuted out famously. They made a movie about him. He had copycats. And normally I'm one to say that mass shooters and those kinds of people don't have a lot of copycats necessarily, or at least it's overstated sometimes. When you start calling him a hero and a hottie and all this kind of stuff, it creates a much more perverse cultural incentive structure for somebody else to do this kind of thing.
And there is something different going on here too, where the algorithms on these social media platforms are rewarding people who are saying the most extreme things. And so those kinds of messages are being amplified, whereas, the person on the street from that piece isn't necessarily being amplified. So I really think that plays into how this dynamic is unfolding.
Yeah. 1,000%. And I mean, a lot of talk to CEOs and corporate leaders I talked to are very concerned about their security in a new way, where a lot of them were like Brian Thompson a week or two ago, just being a little bit more carefree about it, being willing to walk around without major security presence. That has changed in a major way now. And Jonah's right. Like, if he looked like you or I, Jonah, like, he's not getting the same attention that he would looking, kind of in a subjective way.
What are you trying to say?
Yes, exactly. But you're right. You're absolutely right.
But this is also a trend, I think, that you're seeing online across the board, where people are very angry with everything. They're angry with politics, they're angry with CEOs, they're angry across the board, and they're taking it out on social media. And I think the fact that people are making him a hero, it's abhorrent. They should not be connecting healthcare with murder. And I think as a society, I mean, not to be we just need to be doing better. We need to be lifting people up, as opposed to, trying to do what these people are doing on the internet.